love the idea of let's wake up the sleepers, because I really do think there's a lot of that in the church. There is so much talent, so much sitting here in the church, waiting to be tapped, and we're waiting for them to be woke up. It's also true that we need the dreamers. Just this week I was talking with Ori, and Ori is a dreamer, and I love that about Ori, and it's something that we need. And Ori, don't ever stop. Please, don't. Because we need the dreamers in here. We need the people that are willing to think outside the box and think of ways that we can meet needs and meet people in the community. And we need that. So, if you're a dreamer, keep dreaming. Share it. Let us hear it, because I can tell you I want to hear it. And we need it as a church. So don't be afraid to dream. And don't be afraid to share that dream. Because it may be exactly what the Lord is wanting us to do. And if you sit on it and hide it, then it may never happen. Okay, that's my 10 cents worth there. So we'll move on to the sermon next time. We're continuing in the book of Joshua. And we're coming into the second chapter of Joshua. And most of you are probably pretty aware of it. The story of Rahab. It's a beautiful story of how God can take something that's yucky and ugly and messy and turn it into something absolutely beautiful. It's the way God works. And sometimes we don't understand it, but it's exactly the way He works. For those of you who may not have read the story or may not be aware of it, Rahab was a prostitute or a harlot. The Bible calls her a harlot. And in the Greek language, that can mean two things. That can mean a prostitute, or it can mean that she was a female innkeeper. But when you read through what all the scholars say and the way it's presented, almost every biblical scholar agrees that she was probably the prostitute and not a female innkeeper. And would also explain where the location of her house was, being right inside the gate and being right there, easily accessible. Jericho was a very wicked city. It was full of sin, full of idolatry. Baal worship was something there. Nothing says that she was a temple prostitute for Baal, and she probably wasn't, but yet that would have been something very well practiced in Jericho. And so you take this and you see this story, and then here comes the spies. And it's interesting because the biblical scholars don't really know why Joshua sent the spies. God had already promised him in chapter 1, wherever your foot trods, it's yours. So they're not sure why he did that. Others say it goes back to his military background, and because of that, it was natural for him to send spies in. Either way, the spies come into Jericho. They're found out by the kingsmen, and so they have to hide. And where do they hide? They run to Rahab's house. God has a plan that you and I can't even begin to imagine. And this chapter lays that out so beautifully. Rahab didn't know them. They didn't know her. And yet they put their full trust in her, and she put her full trust in them and hid them and lied to the kingsmen, telling them that they had left and were no longer there, and sent them on a rabbit trail of lie of where they went. There are some biblical scholars that absolutely excoriate her for doing that. that there's no excuse that she ever should have lied. But yet, on the other hand, when you see God's hand in it, you can't really ignore that either. I don't know that there's ever a good excuse to lie, but yet, in this case, I don't know. If I was in her situation, I don't know. And she's willing to put her full trust in these guys, and she's willing to be protected because it says in the story that the only thing she asks for from the spies is that her family is saved. Her mom, dad, brothers, sisters, and their families. That's it. She has no friends, she has no husband, she has nothing else. She's not asking for anyone else to be saved other than her family. And so the spies tell her, you need to hang this purple thread in your window, have your family there with you, and we will make sure that they're protected. But if you fail to do any part of that, Rahab, we are not responsible for what happened at that point. As you will notice as we read on in the next chapter, actually, she does hang the purple thread in her window and her family is saved. But her agreeing to be saved puts her in a weird place, which to me is another one of those things where you see God's hand moving in this. One, she's a Canaanite. She is not Jewish, so immediately you would think she's going to be an outcast as soon as she gets with the Israelite people, because she's not one of them. And as you can see, even through Jesus' times, people that were not Jewish were not well accepted. As a matter of fact, there were parts of them that absolutely would have nothing to do with a Gentile or a Samaritan or anyone that was of another race than them. Two, she was a woman. Women were second-class citizens in biblical times. They were basically nothing. And three, she was a prostitute. And you look at that story and you're like, okay, wow. But the beautiful thing is if you read a couple of chapters later, you see Rahab has been incorporated into the Israelite people. She's married. She marries Salmon, who is a nobleman and of the tribe of Judah. 2 generations after her, her offspring produce David. So she went from being a prostitute to being in the direct genealogy of Jesus Christ. All because of what God did. This morning, it would be easy to focus on the fact that God can take junk and turn it into something good, which He will. But this morning, I want us to dig a little bit deeper than that, and I want us to look at our destiny. Now, I know some of you are sitting there going, oh my goodness, Kevin has gone off the deep end. He's turned charismatic, but I promise you I haven't. We should not be afraid of the word destiny. It's a word that everyone in this room should grab a hold of and think, that's me. Rahab's life was totally turned around by one move. And that was her placing her faith in these Israelite spies who would save her. And the other beautiful part of the story, if you go back and read chapter 2, you will see that as soon as she comes in contact with the spies, she immediately says, I've heard all about your God. And we, the Jericho people, are absolutely afraid of your God. And I know, spies, that you are going to win when you come into Jericho. Jericho is going to fall because of you and because of your God. Now, this is a woman that's a prostitute. This is a woman who is a Canaanite, who really is subjected to all kinds of gods and all kinds of things in her culture, but somehow, the scholars say, because of her relations with men that would have been from outside of Jericho, that's how she would have learned about how the Israelites were saved when they crossed the Red Sea and how God made the land dry for them to cross on. And so she heard all those stories, and that's what began the process. But her destiny was not to be a prostitute, not to be an outcast. Her destiny was to be moved from that to being in the direct lineage of Jesus Christ. And you and I don't know God's plans, and you and I will never understand that, but that's one of the things I loved about that song. Because as sleepers, you need to wake up. As sleepers, you have a destiny. You have a place. And so when you wake up and realize who you are in God, the church will wake up and begin to be what God's called her to be. You dreamers, when you wake up, when you realize and stand up for the dream God has given you, He can begin to move you from this point to the next. All that stuff inside of you that you thought were ashes, blemishes, things you would want absolutely nobody to know about, God can make something absolutely beautiful from it. He can change your whole destiny. And there is absolutely no reason for you to be afraid of that. There's 4 things that comes out of this story that I really want us to focus on this morning. The first is you never know how God's going to use you. You see, just as in Rahab's case, she had been made aware of this God that the Israelite people followed. She had heard about it. And somehow in her process, and this is just how the Holy Spirit works, somehow she already knew that their God was going to make them victors over Jericho. And she was willing to put her faith in that. Well, you and I don't know what God is doing in people's lives. We don't know what the Holy Spirit has done. If you think back when we talked about back to the basics, when we talked about the Holy Spirit coming in and moving in people's lives and working in their lives and creating that, working on them, preparing them to come to Christ. You don't know where you're going to be in that. You may be the person that, just like whoever these men were before, that just say, hey, I serve a great God.